again, I could say I'm in the mold of Donald Trump, you know.
No, there's plenty of people trying harder than you to start World War III.
People are still coming, so shall we give another minute to wait?
Yeah, I think if you can get another 2-3 minutes,
Yes,
Akiko,
yes.
that's fine, you know.
Good, thank you. Because I'm just entering whoever comes along.
Yeah.
I have a meeting at 12. I may need to leave a bit early. But thank you for hosting the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you for letting us know. So Jonathan, are you okay to share the screen, or shall I share the screen with your PPT?
Let me share the screen.
Okay,
because,
just test.
I think
I will introduce you formally in a minute or so. And then
okay.
just test whether you could do so.
All right. Let me just okay.
Yeah, we can see. No
Right.
problem.
Okay.
Yes, we see.
Good.
Shall I make an introduction and then we will start? What do you think, Jonathan?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay, so recording is on and then somebody is coming. Professor Charles, if you can admit, please do so.
Yes, will do, of course.
Thank you. Okay, so very good morning, everyone. My name is Akiko Ueno. I am Associate Professor in Marketing and the Head of Research Cluster for Human Technology and Innovation at the School of Management, University of Bradford. It is my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker for today's lecture, Professor Jonathan Liu. As many of us know, securing competitive research funding requires more than a good idea. It demands a strategic framework that bridges academic rigor with real-world needs. Today, Professor Liu will walk us through exactly that process. Professor Liu is an academic leader with over 20 years of proven success in securing competitive research funding from major organizations, including ESRC and the National Lottery Heritage Fund. This hands-on track record of winning bids informs his deep expertise in developing impactful, practice-oriented research. He is the co-founder and executive dean of the International Business School in Sale, Manchester, and adjunct professor at the University of Wales, Trinity St. David, where he supervised doctoral researchers. He also serves Vice Provost and Funding Dean of the School of Management and Leadership at Elite Innovation College, Cambridge, and as Chairman of the Board of Trustees. I think I need to, who is that? Thank you very much. Where was I? I think he was, yes, the Chairman of the Board of Trustees at the Ming-Ai London Institute. Beyond his leadership roles, Professor Liu is an active scholar and editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Business Performance Management, with over 100 journal articles and 10 books to his name. He is an elected council member of the British Academy of Management and serves on the University China Committee in London. Today's session is especially applicable for academics, administrators, and industry practitioners alike. Professor Liu will present a two-part lecture exploring research funding acceleration framework, a structured institutional strategy used by research-intensive UK universities to combine strategic investment, professional development, and bid writing success. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Jonathan Liu. Without further ado, I will now hand over the virtual floor to him. Professor Liu, the mic is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Akiko. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen now with everyone. Can I just have a confirmation? You can see my screen that says exploring the framework used to maximize competitive research grant income applications.
Yes,
Yep,
you can.
good, excellent. Okay, sorry for the long title, but I like long titles because, in a nutshell, you're just trying to say what the session is about. Okay, this session is really in two parts. The first part is really about how the frameworks are being used. What I have found over the years is that through the lack of communication or poor communications between the fund providers, the researchers, and the universities' administrative processes and procedures, it makes life applying for research grant funding a much bigger challenge than it already is. So what I'm going to do in the next hour or so is to share with you, okay, the things that I have picked up over my career. And in particular, okay, I wanted very much to initially just set the scene with part one, which is an overview of the institutional strategies and processes that universities use, and also academics that have been successful in funding or even not successful in funding would recognize and understand. Okay. Part two is more interesting. Part two is I have selected through a combination of espionage, arm twisting, and working with the colleagues from other institutions to give you an idea about what some institutions do. And these are just 5 Russell Group universities. I say that bit is really Cheltenham house rules. You can use it, but don't quote me, okay? If you quote me, I will do the mission impossible, which is to deny everything, okay? So let us focus initially on the first part, which is really about the institutions and what they do. And of course, you might be wondering, why is this important? Well, if you have aspirations of getting promoted, going up the academic ladder in universities, then getting research funds or understanding how research funding actually works and how you can then incorporate research into your academic processes becomes critical. Okay, and here we will look at some of the strategies that the universities use. I have tried to break this down and simplify it into 10 areas. Okay, I will initially cover the first 8. The last 2 are more about what the universities do. Okay, so you can stop me at any time. Okay, or if not, note the slide and let me know when we have that discussion panel. I'm going to try and speak for about 30 odd minutes for this part, and then another 10, 15 for the next. Okay, so bear with me. Okay, right. So let's kick off. Strategic research development and funding intelligence. This is where the first thing the universities do is they have set up research offices. Okay, and the research office works in tandem with the researchers. Okay, but I've heard quite often that academics who are putting in for research funding tend to work more with the fund providers than with the university research office. And this is not good because you have to understand that the universities have the financial obligation as well as the moral obligation to ensure that everything that they are offering, i.e., their staff that are putting forward, fall within the requirements of the university. Okay. But principally, the research office will provide some sort of funding opportunity scanning. Okay. I'm pretty sure you get newsletters, emails from the research office about what opportunities are available. Now, this is well and good if the research office knows what your interests are, but quite often they don't. So, my first advice to you is get to know your research office personnel so that they know you not just as another academic, but really as the person that has specific skills, as they say, in specific areas. So that when something pops up, you are the first name that is on their hit list. Okay. And then that saves you quite a lot of time. Some of the complaints I've heard from colleagues is that by the time the announcement is sent to the academic staff, they have lost like 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Okay. Which also brings to mind that you shouldn't be just relying on the research office to actually inform you about opportunities that are rising, but rather you should be aware that you should be on the mailing list or some of these providers. Okay. What the research office also provides is a range of database and funding requirements that you will need to complete your paperwork. Okay, so it's a good idea to get to know them in advance. Find out from them what are the forms that you will need to fill in from the university in order for your proposal to be vetted and agreed. Okay, a lot of academics get pretty annoyed when they say, why do you have to evaluate, my proposal when I'm the expert? Well, there are many good reasons why they need to, and part of that is if something goes wrong, it is not you that the fund providers will come from, but actually the university. Okay, and also from an academic point of view, it is not possible for us to know exactly what is happening across the university. Today, you are finding that more and more research proposals are multidisciplinary, okay? And they are requiring not just the business and management side of things, but also some of the hard sciences. As you will see later, some of the more lucrative grants actually fall within the hard sciences, okay? So if you are no good in chemistry, that doesn't mean you can't bid for a chemistry driven type of proposal. It basically means you need to have the right team. And the effort here is really about the team. Okay? Right. So assuming, you will build your relationship with the research office, okay? Then, as I said earlier, there are pre-grant development support that you need, okay? Such as, for example, someone to proofread your proposal, someone to check for you that you are aligning with the grant requirements, and actually somebody to help you coordinate, especially if you're doing a multi-institutional bid, okay? Because it's no point just you knowing Joe Blocks from a university. You also need Joe Blocks' university to know who you are, okay? And the typical activities here includes drafting, redrafting the case, and I think what realistically people, tend to ignore is it takes a long time. to develop a good proposal. Okay. What you don't want is to produce a proposal and then it gets rejected. Okay. And of course, again, I've had complaints from colleagues that say to me that the university unkind because they didn't put their proposal forward, or that their proposal was put forward, but it was rejected. Well, the offshot is a rejection is not necessarily good for you or the university. Okay. I think, how do you say, in terms of your own mindset, your own mental health, okay, getting rejected is really not a good feeling. Okay. And what you want to do is to try and minimize that level of rejection. And there are sometimes simple things that causes the application to be rejected. For example, submitting it on the wrong form, submitting it without the due diligence that is supposed to have been approved, or worst case, you actually missed the deadline. Okay, so all of these things require some element of initial hard work. And the interesting thing is, once you've developed a relationship with your research office, okay, it then becomes pretty much, I think, pretty standard because you then know the ground rules. Okay. You can also then rely on the research office as well as your network of people to do some form of internal peer review and quality assurance. Okay. If you have to do anything to do with making sure that your proposal fits the bill, what better assurity is to actually use someone who has made those bids before. Okay, especially when you think about the different research funding organizations. Okay, quite recently I attended one where they actually talked about why why certain proposals were not funded. Okay, it was either the scope was too wide, or the referees themselves that were picked to evaluate the proposal were not of the right caliber. Okay, now this is quite a tricky thing when you think about that, because if you are putting together a proposal that is really very new, okay, where are you going to find the reviewers, that will actually understand that this is a new area? Okay, so conferences that you attend, papers that you read, you need to also then get something like maybe a handful of inverted commas renowned experts that can actually give you heads up. Okay, and you can also then use, not as part of your research team, but as the evaluating peer reviewer. Okay, and this is quite often the case when you apply for ESRC funding. They ask you to nominate, okay, people. When we did the funding for Lottery Heritage, they actually asked us to propose 4 people, which we did. They went to 2, okay? And this then becomes important because you are picking the people that, hopefully will also think of how wonderful your proposal is, okay? So have to think about the internal peer review and who the reviewers are going to be. And again, this is not something you're going to do overnight. Okay, if you attend a conference and you get to know people, build that relationship. Okay, see whether you can use them, in the future. Now you might think, hang on, Jonathan, that is a bit like using people. Well, unfortunately, that is the name of the game. You just need to reciprocate. Okay, I have used and called upon many, many people over my career, and I have always returned the favor. Okay, so that is something that us academics have to do. And we can't be critical of all other people's research, okay? Because some of them are at times better than ours, okay? So going on to the fourth point, this is probably the best use of your research office, because they can give you the full economic costing paradigms and whatever preparation is needed to get your figures to tally up. Okay. Which also tells me that there are times when you may choose to spend time working on proposals that will generate, a much better financial return to the university than you would otherwise. Okay, the proposals that go for, there are lots of people that apply for, proposals that are £10,000 and under, with the view that they would then be able to step up to a much bigger funded project. And yes, that's a good strategy. That there's some merit in it, but unfortunately, there are not that many where you do a small proposal and it would lead to a much bigger funded proposal later on. Okay, so what you will have to do is you have to be cautious to just try and make sure that actually you pick up all the rudiments on compliance that you would need for doing your funding support. Okay, so moving on to point 5, which is demand management and internal selection. This is something that a lot of my colleagues get very upset with. Okay, because they will always do some element of comparison. They will compare how come Akiko got the project supported and I didn't. Okay, and I'm much better looking than Akiko, and you get all these nonsense that happen. And part of it is very much, I would say, a natural defense of being rejected. Okay, my advice is to take on the advice. Okay, if somebody rejects you, find out from them why, so that you don't make the mistake the second time. Okay, and it's exactly the same as putting in your publications. Okay, the higher ranked the journal, okay, the more changes you need to make. Okay, from my experience, you are looking at, with good ranking journals, you are probably looking at between 3 to 5 revisions, and sometimes the editors make you make the changes, and then on second or third or fourth review, they come back and tell you it was better in the first version. Okay, or second version. And this is where you just have to accept that it is the process that we go through to ensure that the proposal is up to scrutiny. Okay, or the papers up to be scrutinized, and likewise your proposal are up for scrutiny. Okay, you should also bear in mind is that when you apply for research funding, okay, it is not free as far as the university is concerned. Okay, they have to allocate time for you. They have to also ensure that the primary driver, which is the funding that most academics are getting, is for actually teaching. Okay, so therefore it is important that there is some element of justification of why you are being released to go and do some research which may or may not benefit the institution. It might benefit all of mankind, but at the end of the day, I think it's important that we bear in mind that we owe loyalty to our employees, our employer, because they are the ones that are funding us. Okay. You also want to think about how the university operates on its selection and who the selection panel people are. Okay, quite often I also hear from people that have had their proposal rejected is that there was some element of biasness, that the dean didn't like them, or that there's a member of the panel that didn't like them. the same sort of excuses, I would say, that students give me when they don't get good grades. Okay? So this is where you need to be a bit thick-skinned to understand that it's not your good looks that is being scrutinized. Okay? If it was, it would be much easier. It's actually about the proposal. It's really about the gaps in it and whether the timing is right, for the university. Quite often, the university has limited resources, and the research panel will actually say, look, this is good, but it can't go in this time because we don't have sufficient funds to support it. Maybe put it in the second round or the third round. Okay? So again, think about the internal selection process as well. The other element is that where the research committee and panels are very useful, and this is really from the time when I was the research director at Regents University. I spent a colossal amount of time in actually helping colleagues write grant proposals. I'd had writing retreats to help them. We also had development programs to try and get early career researchers in tow. Okay, because here you're really trying to build the capacity and the know-how within the institution, and this is something that the university's research panels and coordinators are fully engaged with. Okay, so it's very much like this session. It really has, from my understanding, support of the university. Okay, and why is there support for the university for this type of activity? Is because it helps our colleagues get better. It helps our colleagues develop networks of researchers that they need to bring together, okay, to actually get things going. And for those of you who are interested in research leadership, like for whatever reason you may want to be the next research director, there are programs that are being offered by the British Academy of Management as well as the Chartered Association of Business Schools, where they run very similar programs that bring together like-minded research directors, and you share the workload or the understanding of how things work with these experienced research leaders. Okay. What I found also very useful was organizing sandpit events, or when I was alerted to events that was being offered by ESPRC, Lottery Heritage, Nullfield Funding, where they actually try to bring together researchers. You'll be absolutely amazed how often researchers don't attend, because either they don't know about that or they know about it, but they don't think that it would be useful for them. My advice is, okay, unless you attend, you are not going to get known, and you might not pick up the intricate details that will actually make your proposal successful. Okay, so keep an eye out. And this is where I also find research office people are very useful, because they alert you. They tell you there's this event going on. And to be quite honest, universities are quite prepared to actually fund, okay, individuals to attend these sessions, provided when they come back, they do some element of dissemination for fellow colleagues. Okay, and that's something I did, as the research director, where if I funded someone to attend a conference, they had to come back and spend a workshop explaining the usefulness of the conference that they attended and the key people that they met. And likewise, if you attend a Sandpit event, okay, that's where you are then able to share the thing. The other point about Sandpits is that it's like a play box. okay? You are there and you are working with people who are also interested in the area that you're interested in, but they might come with a very different set of skills. And therefore, when you put in the application, your application becomes much stronger, okay? All right, so point 7, okay, is strategic support for large and collaborative grants. This is separate from the run-of-the-mill that universities have, for the general academics, okay? Large grant provision, are things like the Horizon programs where you are looking at, something like maybe 10 to 12 universities involved, and there is a consortium of people coming together, and it needs to be project managed properly. And this is something also that the grant proposal might be spread across a number of years. Okay, so this then becomes critical that the university actually has the propensity to support the individuals that are putting for these proposals beyond the first year or two. Okay, and again, the requirements here are different. Okay, but they all operate roughly within the same sort of parameters that you are now needing to get to know the people that you are going to elope with. So it's a bit like you're getting married. Okay, so unless you get to know the people you're going to get married, it will end in fallout, it will end in divorce, or it will not be successful. Okay, and when you attend conferences, for example, I have looked at grant provisions by members of BAM, okay, and I'm always like really very grateful to BAM for bringing fellow colleagues together who may never have ever met, because somebody might be in Southampton University down by the coast working with someone up in, let's say, Lancashire, in Manchester, in Sunderland, okay, where the only opportunity for them to meet is if they are at the same conference or if they read each other's papers. Okay, so strategic support, is something that research offices are now offering, and this is something that you need to get involved with. Okay, if you are looking at doing a multi institution proposal. Okay, and then the eighth, and perhaps the financial incentive and seed funding. All right, many universities have internal funding processes. Okay, so the 5,000, the 10,000 that you are applying for may not necessarily need to go outside of the institution. Okay, so what is the benefit of getting some sort of internal seed funding application through? Okay, is that your university then gets to know you. Okay, as wonderful as you may be, okay, not everybody in the institution will know you. So you would really need to actually get about, and actually if you are building a career, okay, this is where becoming known within the university is also important. Okay, and they, there is also dedicated funds that universities use to support certain initiatives. So, for example, with one of the universities that I know of in the sort of southeast of England, that they were into farming, and there were so many fund provisions for farming. Okay, that there were dedicated funds to develop major proposals that look at how some of these farms are, can be better managed. So if you are, let's say, in business and management, and you have no idea or aspiration to be a farmer, okay, it doesn't mean you can't get involved, okay? And especially, I think today, there are more and more proposals that are coming out on food production, okay, from growing the food to manufacturing and distributing the food, okay. If you look at some of the BBC programs, okay, on the factory management, I mean, one of the things that we always talk about here in the UK is about tea and biscuits, okay. So ask yourself this: do you really know how biscuits are made? Okay, if you don't, then get on to the BBC. They have loads of these type of very useful, what some people would say, useless information, okay, about how things are actually manufactured in the UK, okay? And some of these large grants also require match funding, okay? And match funding from the universities is easier to produce when they have learned professors that they can put onto the proposals, because then what they're doing is they're actually matching the funding through the salaries or the facilities of the university. Okay, so for example, most universities have something like spare capacity of 30 to 40%. Okay, if you work out your teaching curriculum and the teaching time, you would probably only use something like 60 to 70% of the space that is allocated for teaching. Okay, so the question then is, can you use the additional, inverted commas, free space, but then actually embed it into your grants? Okay. So again, I think there are quite a lot of things that you will pick up when you start looking at the financial incentives side from the university. Okay. And then finally, it's about governance, approval, and then post-award support. Okay. I think in my earlier slide, I showed you 8 things that you need to think about. The one thing you don't need to think about, but it's already there, is, for example, the governance that the research grant office will provide you. And this is really pre-submission. You now know that in almost all research grant applications, there has to be an ethical compliance requirement, okay? And it's not just enough to say, I put this through the research committee and they approved it, okay? It has to follow through due process. You then also need to have institution sign-off. If you look at the timeline, it is not uncommon for the university to require a timeline of no less than 3 weeks from the time you have the paperwork completed. And it helps if you're working with the research office people. Okay, they won't be able to make it quicker, but they would then at least be able to verify that you have done the due process, because usually the person that signs it off is either the DVC, the chancellor, or the vice chancellor, but usually somebody pretty senior. Okay, and it is not realistic to think that they are going to sign it off without any due process having followed up. So what happens if you are fortunate enough to get funding? Well, then you have all your other things that you need to do. You need to be ensured that the funding is being properly spent. Okay, because at the end of the day, if there is some misfunding or misspending of funds, you as the principal investigator will be accountable. Okay, so it's useful to actually also understand that the submission, the work by the research office doesn't end after you win your funding. Okay, they will also then have to help you prepare your reports, your compliance. Okay, when I was doing a project at Regent's University, we agreed with the fund providers that we would produce a booklet, okay, and that there would be 5,000 copies that was produced of high quality and distributed, okay. So you need to now know that, apart from writing the damn thing up, you really need other people to help you process it and then also distribute it, okay. And this is where the administrative support becomes useful, okay. Uh, the typical structure of research support, therefore, okay, for UK universities are pretty much the same, and these are the five groupings of services that they provide. They will do some sort of research development office to keep you informed. They will do some sort of pre-award supporting team. I mean, for example, in my early days at Middlesex University, I worked very closely with the finance people because for the life of me, I couldn't get the funding costs sorted out on how much uh, salaries were for the researchers. Okay. If you ask any British academic how much pay they're getting, they won't tell you because it's either they're too embarrassed for being paid so badly or being overpaid. Okay, and this is where it's useful for the finance office to actually give you the numbers because they then will also work out what the on-cost contribution is. It's not just the take-home pay. Okay, and then also the research office will know of the viable funding institutions that are available that have worked with the university, as well as the research departments and research centers that the universities have. Okay. So the final thing would be about core institutional strategies. I leave this for you to read on your own. And I'm going to draw this section to a close. And I'm happy to take some initial questions, but what I then want to focus on is this research funding accelerated framework, which is in part 2, okay, which I will, embark on after a 2-3 minute question time, okay? And part 2 is we will look at 5 different universities, what they do, what sort of framework they use, and the Cheltenham House rules apply, okay? You can't quote me. You can use the information, but just said that some, arty-farty professor, actually shared the information, but never disclose who that person is, okay? Right. So I'm just going to stop presenting for a while and happy to take any questions that people may have for this first part of the workshop. Okay.
So I will stop recording here now.
Okay.